It's hard to believe that McCall and I have been here for a little over a month now. But when we moved here, we had all sorts of boxes that just looked like this. In fact, this is one of the boxes we moved with. McCall had a system for the boxes where there was a colored sticker and then numbers. You can ask her or I about that later if you want to know some tips for moving. It worked out really well. But in these boxes are all sorts of stuff. If you ever moved, you know how awful it is to deal with boxes. I mean, there's just an endless supply of boxes that you have to fill, and then there's an endless supply of boxes that you have to unfill, and it's like a sea of boxes that you can just swim in of all sorts of stuff. There's boxes that we had that were full of plates, and then there was other boxes that we had that were full of books. There were so many boxes full of so many different things. But today, this box that I have is not a box of stuff that we moved with us, that we brought to our home. Instead, this box has in it some of the stuff that some of us are carrying around in our life. That some of us have heavy loads that they're just carrying things around. You may not even realize that you have some stuff in a box that you're carrying around, but in reality, you do. Maybe what's in your box is a mask. Maybe you come to church and you act one way, you look one way, you talk one way, but then whenever you go home or when you're not around church people, you act a little differently. Maybe you speak good and well and in a certain way when you're at a church function, but when you're at home, you don't treat your spouse quite right. You don't treat your kids quite right. Maybe when you're at work, you act a little differently that makes it seem that you are a little two-faced. And if that's you, maybe in your box is a mask. But maybe it's not a mask. Maybe what's in your box is a mirror. Maybe in your life, you worship yourself a little bit. You flaunt your achievements, your success, your awards, your status. Maybe you spend a little bit too much time looking at yourself, spending so much time, energy, money, and effort into how you physically look and caring about what people think about you physically when you should be spending your time, energy, money, effort in how you look spiritually before God. And whatever that is, maybe you have a little self-worship in your life where you are having a mirror in your box. It might not be that, but maybe in your box is a phone that represents the lust that's in your life. Maybe when it's late at night, when everyone else has gone to sleep, you get on your phone and you go on websites that you know you shouldn't be on, and you start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Maybe as you're walking in life and you see different people, you fantasize in your head, you lust after people in your life. And if that's you, if you have lust, maybe you struggle and you have a phone in your box. Maybe it's not that, maybe it's a magazine. Maybe in your life you enjoy gossip that goes on. Maybe you get a thrill whenever you hear about people's shortcomings and problems in their life, when you hear about their family issues, and you enjoy the talk and drama that goes around it. Or maybe you're on the other side of that and you get a thrill whenever you are the one that is the source of information, drama, and gossip, and you can talk about people's problems around them without addressing it to them. And if that's you, if you have gossip in your life, maybe that means you have a magazine in your box. Maybe it's not that, maybe it's a bottle. Maybe it's the bottle that has a vice grip on your life. This bottle that you just can't seem to get rid of. That you throw it out, you say you're done, but all of a sudden it magnetizes, it gravitates its way back, and even though it's out of the box at one point, somehow it just ends up back in the box. Or maybe it's something so simple, maybe it's a toy car that's in your box. Maybe in your life you have trouble being envious and jealous of what other people have. That you're jealous of that person who has that new, nice, big house that they've built, or of the money that they earn, or the things that they get to have that just no matter what, because of your life circumstances, you are never going to be able to get. It might not be tangible items, but it might be intangible things. Maybe you look at someone else's family life and you think, man, they've got it made. That they have a spouse that just loves them. They have a happy, fulfilling marriage while I'm over here not. Or maybe they have kids that are well-behaved, that get along, that seem to love each other, that there's no issues on the outside, and you think to yourself, I wish I had what they had. It might be something else, but maybe you get jealous of people in your life and envious. And if that's you, you might have a model car in your box. Whatever it looks like, some of us have a box in this church today. Some of us have things that we are carrying around, and maybe we don't realize it, but some of us have loads that are getting pretty heavy. It may not feel heavy at first, but as time goes on, this box that you're carrying, this load that some of us are carrying, weighs us down. The box might be getting heavy because of the guilt and shame of going back to that sin time and time again, that habit that you just can't seem to kick. Or maybe the weight comes from the secrecy of trying to hide the sin or the items in your box. That you're trying to keep it under wraps. But the more you do that, the more you cover it up, the more the lies that you add on trying to make things look good, the heavier this box gets. Or maybe it's just the plain exhaustion, the exhaustion of trying to live a faithful Christian life, but then every once in a while you go back to these things that you don't want to do. You do the very things that you don't want to do. Or maybe the box is heavy because it's causing mass destruction in your life. That you are having destroyed, ruined, dissolved relationships in your life because of what's in your box. That your life is a mess because of what's in your box, and it's getting to be a pretty heavy burden. And this box, it just gets heavier and heavier as you are a Christian, because we proclaim that King Jesus has forgiven us of sins, that he has died on the cross and paid the price, and yet some of us are still dealing with this box that we say that's been forgiven of. Some of us are still having this heavy load that we're trying to deal with, and it just seems to get heavier when we put that into perspective. And then there are some of us that are noticing other people in the church who have these boxes, and we don't know what to do about it. We're trying to figure it out. So what do we do when we see people with these boxes? How do we address sin in the church? We've been in a sermon series called Community. This is the last final sermon of this series that we're kind of following up. And if you haven't been here the past couple weeks, that's fine. You can go back and see the sermons on our YouTube channel or our website if you want to. But the past couple weeks, we have been learning how we can develop unity in our church, how we can take practical measures to be more unified as followers of Jesus. So we've looked at like how we can serve one another in love, and how we are to be charitable to each other, and so on and so forth. But here's a problem. When sin goes unchecked in the church, it stunts the unity of our community. When we don't deal with these boxes, unity can't prosper. So again, when we see these boxes waved around, when we see people struggling with these heavy loads, what are we as a church supposed to do? How do we address the sin? Paul, he's writing to a church. We've been looking at different churches that he's written to. And to this church, he has a line that he says. He says, walk in the Spirit, walk by the Spirit, not in the flesh. In other words, he says, walk in a way that honors God rather than a way that turns away from God. And then the church has a question for him, a question similar to ours. They ask, well, what if we find people who aren't walking in the Spirit? What if we find followers of Jesus who are somehow stuck walking in the flesh? And Paul's going to help them out, and he's going to help us out in turn. And here's what he's going to say first. He's going to simply say that when we find people who are in sin, we restore them from their sin. That we walk alongside of them and we help them back onto the right path. If you have a Bible, why don't you go ahead and join me in Galatians 6 this morning. Again, that's Galatians 6. We'll be at the top in verse 1. And as we read this, notice that Paul's focus is on how we are to restore people. We are to address sin when it comes up. Here's what he writes in Galatians 6, verse 1. Brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you won't be tempted. What Paul is telling us is that when sin comes up, we do not ignore it. Whether it's something that has happened in secret and it comes to light, or whether it's something that happened very publicly, sin has to be addressed. That we are to restore a brother or sister in Christ gently. That we help them walk in the Spirit with a loving, guiding hand. And I love the word for restore here. It's a word that was used whenever walls were being rebuilt. It's what fishermen would say whenever a net was being repaired. It's the image of doctors setting a broken bone. The idea is that we are to heal what has been broken in our community, to guide people to walk in the Spirit more faithfully, to not leave them in a ditch, but to drag them back out and help them on. But Paul goes on, and it's not just about restoring people to sin, from sin, and that's an important responsibility we have. But there's a second responsibility that he's going to highlight, and he's going to say that not only should we restore people from sinning, but whenever we have people that continue to struggle with sin, when we have people that continue to be tempted by these things that are dragging them down, what we do with it is important. And what he says is that we are called as a church to be mutually accountable, that we walk side by side with one another to grow and to help them avoid the difficulties. He's going to use an image to emphasize this, and he's going to tell us to carry one another's burdens. Here's what Paul writes. He says this in verse 2 and 3. Carry one another's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone considers himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. The word for burden here describes a heavy weight that is being carried and lugged around for hours and miles on end with no end in sight. And some of us here feel that to our core. That what's in our box is causing us to be a heavy, heavy burden. It might be the burden of self-worship, or the burden of lust, or the burden of greed. For some of us, our burdens is something that we did in the past that we never really properly addressed. For others of us, it's the burden is the skeleton in the closet that we don't want anyone to really know about. But some of us here have these burdens and they're weighing it down, and as much as we want to let go, as much as we want to just drop the weight, we can't. It's like glued to our hands. And so Paul, he tells us that this heavy load is not meant to be carried alone. That instead, we are to help one another carry these burdens. But what does that look like? How are we supposed to help carry each other's burdens, to lighten the box? How do we keep each other accountable? Which is really what Paul's saying here, that we are to help keep each other accountable. Well, let me show you what that looks like. Let's say I represent a raging alcoholic, and I'm not a raging alcoholic, I promise. And let's say that my dad has died. My dad hasn't died. We're just creating a scenario here. And let's say that that's going on, and because of these deep emotions that are seated in, I want to just kind of tuck them away, and so I spiral out of control in alcoholism. I drink to my heart's content. I drink at home, and then sometimes I'll go to the local bar, and I will black out. And this is causing a lot of strain on my life. First, it's causing a lot of financial challenges and distress because I am just wasting money away. That I am not being a good steward of what God's given me. That I am causing financial problems for my family. But also, there's a lot of relational distress going on. My wife and I get in fights all the time, and I am not treating her as I should. My kids are distancing themselves away because they don't like how I act when I'm drunk. This is a problem. It's a heavy load for me, and I've tried to stop in the past, but I just can't quite do it on my own. But then there's Daniel. And we'll say for today that Daniel's my friend. Now, we might be friends later. We'll see. But for today, he's at least my friend. But Daniel looks at me, and he's a mature believer, and he looks at me, and he sees how much destruction that's going on in my life. And he comes up to me, and he says, Walker, I noticed that you really struggle with drinking. And I'm seeing that's just ruining your life, and it's causing a lot of harm. I want to help you. How can I help you? And by doing that, what Daniel's really saying is, let me carry your heavy load. And then from that point on, Daniel is being accountable for me. Maybe it's when it's late at night and I'm feeling the emotions come up and I want to suppress them again. I want to go back to that bottle that I shouldn't be. And so I called Daniel up and said, hey, I really need some help right now. I am about to go back into that sin that I'm having issues with. Can I just have you on the phone? And so for the next 15 minutes, the next half hour, the next hour, he's on the phone with me until that temptation suppresses and goes away. Or maybe what it's like is that he and I, we meet with each other every week. Maybe we have a Bible study together, or maybe we pray together. Or maybe what ends up happening is he is there to ask me the tough questions that everyone else is afraid to ask me, to help keep me accountable. Questions like, have you drank anything this week? If so, when and where? Where are you most tempted to drink and slip into alcoholism again? What he's doing there is he's keeping me accountable. What he's doing there is he's helping me carry my heavy load. Maybe in his day-to-day, Daniel texts me and he encourages me. Maybe he prays for me regularly. Maybe he keeps an eye out for where there could be triggers in my life that could lead me back into sin, and he helps me avoid those situations. But through all of this, Daniel, time and time again, he is helping me be kept accountable. He is helping me carry this heavy load that's on my shoulders. Friends, I've said this before, and I want to say it again. God did not call us to a private journey. God called us to be a people, to be a community of believers that help each other walk in the Spirit, to live Spirit-filled, God-honoring lives. And one of the ways that we can do that is by helping each other stay mutually accountable. That when we see things go on, we do not just let it go away. We don't ignore, suppress, and hide it, but instead we bring it to the surface and we make sure that does not happen again. We help carry each other's heavy, heavy loads. But I know as I say that, as I talk about this being a holy responsibility for us, I know that there's some of you here in the audience that might be scoffing at what I'm saying. For some of you, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't need to be that person for other people. I don't even want to help other people like that. In fact, there's 100 other people that can do that for them. I'm just going to pass it on for them. But there's other people on the other side of the spectrum that are going, I don't want help. I don't need help. I can deal with my lust. I can deal with my greed. I can deal with my gossip on my own. I don't need other people in my life to do it for me. But friends, whether you're on the spectrum that doesn't want to help, or if you're on the spectrum that doesn't think that you need help, what Paul tells us is that this is a form of pride. He says that when we think we are something, but when we are really nothing, we are being self-deceptive. And friends, I can say that I have been on both sides of that spectrum. Back in high school, I had some junk in my box. Stuff, sin that was unkept, sin that wasn't being dealt with, and I should have reached out to someone in my life, but I never did. I thought I can handle it on my own. I will take care of it. It'll pass eventually. But I should have reached out to my youth minister. I should have reached out to a spiritual mentor. I should have talked with a friend to help me keep accountable, but I never did that. But on the other side of that, there have been times where I have ignored helping other people. Where there have been people in my life that needed accountability, that needed someone to walk with them to avoid certain things, and I didn't do it. I either ignored them, I justified me not helping, or I passed them off to someone else. But in either scenario I was, whether I refused to get help or I refused to help someone, I was being prideful. I was deceiving myself, where I thought, I'm strong enough to do this, or I am higher than they are. But what if that didn't have to be the norm? What if we here at Southern Heights were different? What if we built a culture where we would encourage people to confess their sins openly and freely without judgment? We don't judge not because we don't believe in right or wrong. We absolutely do believe in right and wrong. But we don't judge because if we judge, we are judging ourselves for the sins that are in our own hearts, because we are all fallen creatures striving to walk in the Spirit more faithfully. What if we created a culture that instead of ignoring, gossiping, judging the sin in people's lives, what if instead we created a culture that built compassion and mercy and grace and forgiveness for people whenever they fall short? What would happen if we took each other's heavy loads and carried them? I imagine so much would happen. My guess is that for many people in this room, they would feel unburdened for one of the first times in a really long time. My guess is that there would be less secrecy, less scandals, less shock and awe whenever things come up. And there would be more of us as a community of believers walking in the Spirit, being Spirit-filled, living in God-honoring ways. So don't close your ears to the words of Scripture today, friends. Instead, lean into what Paul is telling us. And Paul is simply telling us this today, that when we carry each other's burdens, we lighten the heavy loads. That when we help keep each other accountable, when we restore people from sin, we will live Spirit-filled lives. And here's a challenge that I want you to take home to live this out. This is a challenge that I want you to put into practice this next week, this next month, this next year. I want you to either find accountability or be the one who gives it. That maybe some of you in this room are struggling with sin. You have the heavy loads. You have bad habits in your life. You have things that you keep turning to that you don't want to turn to over and over again. Find someone in your life to keep you accountable. Find someone who will ask you the tough questions. It might be a spiritual mentor. It might be a friend, but find someone in your life who will help keep you accountable, who will help you walk more faithfully in the Spirit. And for some of you may have a pretty spiritually mature life, but you have a responsibility to your brother and sister in Christ to help keep someone else accountable. And I know you know some people in your life who need accountability because you see the boxes that some of us are carrying. You see some of the heavy loads that are in their lives, and if you see them, you need to be the one to help keep them accountable, to ask them the tough questions, to be present in their life, to help them walk more faithfully in the Spirit. But whichever part of the spectrum you're on, this is not a recommendation. This is not something that Paul says you might consider doing. This is a vital part of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. This is a key, prominent feature of what it means to be part of God's people. That we don't let sin go unchecked, but we help walk with each other. We help each other grow closer to Jesus. We help each other love Jesus more and see Jesus through each other more. And so whether you're on one spectrum or the other, this is something that all of us, as followers of Jesus, are supposed to do. This is a holy responsibility from God for His people. But what if that doesn't happen? What if you are stuck struggling with sin? What if you still have this heavy load and no one does anything about it? No one comes and helps you no matter your difficulties, no one deals anything? Does that mean that you're off the hook? Does that mean that you no longer have to worry about this because, well, no one's going to help me, so I guess it's okay to do? Not quite. If we notice what Paul says in these last two verses of this passage, he's going to remind us that while we are to be mutually accountable for one another, ultimately we are individually responsible for our sin and for our own loads. That one day we will be before God and God will determine whether we walked in the Spirit or walked in the flesh. And so ultimately Paul's going to tell us that we have to carry our own loads. Here's what he writes. He says this: let each person examine his own work, and then he can take pride in himself alone and not compare himself with someone else. For each person will have to carry his own load. Paul is looking to the future where one day we will be before God. And what Paul's telling us is that other people around us are not the ones that are responsible for what's in our box. Ultimately, we are the ones who are responsible for growing closer to Jesus. And one day we will be all before God, and God will determine whether we walked a life that was in the Spirit or a walk that was ultimately in the flesh. And so while we should have mutual accountability, we are ultimately also individually responsible. So before we can take accountability with one another, we first have to take responsibility. And for us to be responsible, to take the first steps, here's what I want us to consider doing during this next song. In front of you are some index cards and pens and things in front of you. What I want you to consider is to take responsibility for some of the burdens that are in your life. What I want you to do is I want you to write down either a burden you're carrying, a skeleton that's in your closet, a sin that you're struggling with. And I want you to take that index card, write it down, and then during this next song, I want you to fold it up and then drop it in the box during this next song. As a way to say, as a way to symbolize, I'm going to take some responsibility. I'm going to take my steps to lead myself to accountability. And I know that sounds scary to do for a number of reasons. It's scary because it means that you have to be honest with yourself, that you're going to have to expose the sin that's in the darkness to the light, that you have to take some responsibility to yourself in your own life and your own heart, and that's kind of scary. But it's also scary because what are other people going to think when you come forward and you drop something in this box? What are people going to be saying around me? What are they going to think about me after that? What are they going to do? My friends, have no fear. In this next moment, there will be no judgment, because we all have open hearts that want us to help each other walk more faithfully in the Spirit. And this is your first step for some of you to help deal with that load that you've been carrying too long. Because when we carry each other's burdens, we lighten the heavy loads.
Would you stand as we sing? I've carried a burden for too long on my own. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. I see it now. I'm
don't let this be the end. Let it be a seed that blossoms into a beautiful flower. Take accountability, find someone to keep you accountable, or be the one who gives it. This is the last sermon in our sermon series community, and it's been a wonderful journey where we are learning to develop unity in our church. But that doesn't have to be the end just because our sermon series is over, right? This can be a chance for us to continue this from time and time again. So I hope that as you move forward, that you'll continue to have a heart that beats for unity in our church. But also for some of you, maybe you're looking for a place that can be your community. A place that you can call home. A place where you feel like you will be loved. A place where you will belong. I want to invite you today to make Southern Heights that community. There'll be people out in the drop, which is that room as your way out, that if you want to start that journey, go talk with some of them. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next week.